On the coldest night of the year, when the breath of the world seemed frozen in the icy grip of winter, a sound at Henry Dalton's door shattered the endless silence. It wasn't loud, barely a whisper against the storm raging outside, but it was enough. Enough to pull the reclusive veteran from the cocoon of isolation he had wrapped tightly around himself. Enough to awaken instincts sharpened over years of survival in faraway battlefields. What he found waiting on the other side of the door wasn't a person. No, it was something unheard, unseen, yet heartbreaking all the same. A German shepherd stood shivering in the snow, her coat dull and dirtied by frost. Pressed against her side, almost swallowed by her fur, were two tiny puppies trembling with every gust of icy wind. What happened next wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the start of something bigger. Something both man and animal would come to rely on. Before this night was over, years of solitude would fracture, memories would claw their way back to the surface, and a decision would be made that neither man nor beast would forget. Henry Dalton was no stranger to the harshness of life or the unforgiving nature of the world. The wind tore against his cabin like an animal desperate to be heard, snow piling relentlessly against the door. Inside, he sat alone in his small, weathered home, the fire crackling softly at his side. His hands, wrapped around a steaming mug of bitter coffee, rested against his knees as he stared into the flames. Shadows danced along the walls, bending and stretching with every flicker of light. The storm had trapped him there for 3 days now. This loneliness was a routine he had grown accustomed to, even come to prefer. He once called this solitude peace, though tonight the air was heavy, charged with something unspeakable. A strange tension hummed, whispering beneath the storm's howl. And then the sound broke through. A soft, muffled scratching at the door, tentative yet desperate. Henry froze. His grip on the mug tightened, and for a moment he wasn't sure he had heard anything at all. But then it came again, more insistent now, a faint whimper riding the edges of the wind. He set his coffee down and rose slowly, every joint in his body groaning in protest to the cold. His movements were cautious, as though the quiet world around him might shatter. He moved toward the door, his steps deliberate and heavy on the floorboards. The scratching came again. Through the frost-covered window, he caught a shadowy figure blurred by the swirls of snow. Wiping the glass with his sleeve, he leaned closer for a better look. And there she was, a German shepherd, trembling uncontrollably, half buried in snow with her ribs pressing against her thin, matted coat. She stood firm despite her struggle. At her side, huddled in the freezing grip of the storm, were two tiny bundles pressed tight against her. Puppies, he realized, their fragile bodies quivering as though clinging to their last fragment of warmth. Her eyes darted up, meeting his through the frosty glass. Wide, dark, and pleading, they reached into the furthest corners of Henry's chest, shaking something loose that he had long kept buried. They weren't the eyes of a stray. They were the eyes of a mother, desperate and willing to do anything to keep her young alive. For a moment, he hesitated. He was no stranger to heartache or hard decisions, and this one felt heavy before it had even been made. Opening that door meant inviting chaos into the quiet stability he clung to. It meant responsibility. But as the moment stretched and snow pressed harder against the cabin's walls, something about her gaze was impossible to ignore. He sighed, reaching for the doorknob with a slow and measured hand. The wind rushed inside as he opened it, cutting through him like a blade, but the shepherd didn't retreat. If anything, she dug herself deeper into the snow, shielding the pups against the bitter cold. "Come on, girl," he murmured, his voice low and coaxing. He crouched slightly, his knees creaking as he extended one hand. She whimpered softly, nudging one of the furry bundles closer as if to show him why she was there. Her bravery, her determination. made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. "You'll freeze out here," he said, even softer now, a thread of urgency weaving through his tone. Seconds ticked by, heavy and loaded with tension, but then she moved, just a step. Then another. And Henry found himself stepping aside to usher her into the warmth of the only world he had left. The door closed behind them, muffling the raging storm outside. The difference inside was so immediate, it almost seemed to overwhelm the shepherd. The heat from the fire made her tremble even harder, her legs unsteady on the wooden floor. The puppies, tiny and weak, barely shifted, their small bodies pressed tighter against her belly. They were alive, but just barely. Watching them, Henry's throat tightened. The man turned, grabbing an old quilt from the back of his couch. He approached slowly, one deliberate step after another, watching as the mother flinched slightly. Her body dipped lower, forming a protective arc over her pups. A low growl rose from her throat, not threatening, not aggressive. It was a warning born of exhaustion and instinct, a mother unwilling to risk whatever shattered trust had brought her here. "All right," Henry muttered, halting his approach and kneeling a few paces away. He raised his hands, his fingers loose and unthreatening. "You've been through enough. I'm not here to hurt you." She held his gaze for several long seconds, and then something shifted. Slowly, she lowered herself to the ground, curling protectively as though shielding her pups from even the fire's warmth. He backed away for now, letting her settle. Quietly, he walked into the small kitchen and returned with a bowl of warm water, placing it on the floor with a careful hand. He retreated again, watching as she eyed the bowl, her caution still intact but her need for survival pushing her forward. After what felt like an eternity, she leaned her head down and began lapping at the water. Small, hesitant movements turned into steady gulps. Her pups whimpered faintly, too weak to do more. Henry didn't speak again, didn't move. He simply watched, the scene before him thawing parts of himself he thought were long gone. The dog's coat glistened in the firelight, battle-worn yet. Proud, as she continued to fight for the lives that depended on her. And as Henry's tired, weathered eyes drifted between the mother and her pups, a quiet thought took shape in his mind. This wasn't just a moment. It was the start of something bigger, something that felt inexplicably like hope. But didn't move. Far from her warmth, he sat back down in his chair, unsure of what to make of the situation. He hadn't planned for this. He'd gone 3 years in that cabin without a single visitor, and now out off nowhere, life had walked back through his door cold-starved. And shaking, Henry watched her in silence. He noticed the way she kept glancing at him, not with aggression, but with uncertainty, as if she was still measuring whether he was danger or refuge. He understood that look all too well. He had once worn it himself long. After the war, he had built up walls no one could get through. The world outside had felt foreign. Too loud, too cruel, too predictable. This cabin had been highscape, but now watching this animal barely hanging on, choosing to protect their young instead of fleeing, something stirred in him, a quiet recognition. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" He whispered. The fire crackled. The dog shifted slightly, adjusting her pups with her nose. Henry sighed and reached for another blanket. "Well," he said softly, more to himself than to her, "you're Safino, and I guess that makes 2 of us." By the next morning, the storm had passed. A soft light filtered through the frost coat windows, and the snow outside shimmered like crushed glass. Henry awoke to the sound of soft whimpers in earth. Fireplace blinking the sleep from his eyes. Had turned his head and saw them still curled up near the fire, the mother and her pups breathing in sync like one fragile unit. She lifted her head, which heard him stir, her eyes still cautious but no longer desperate. The fear that had gripped her the night before had softened into something else, wary trust. "Good morning, girl," Henry said gently as he stretched, his joints popping. He moved slowly to the kitchen, rummaging through the pantry. Not much there, but he found a can of chicken soup. It wasn't ideal, but Warm broth was better than nothing. When he set the bowl down near her, she sniffed cautiously, then began to lap it up. The pup stirred a death to smell one of them. Slightly larger, crawling closer to her side, the other gave a faint squeak and wiggled toward warmth. Henry sat on the floor a few feet away and just watched. You need a name, he murmured, something that carries through it of survival the way you looked at him last night, not begging, not broken, just refusing to let go. He paused, studying her, the curve of her frame, sapphire light in her tired eyes. Hope, he whispered. Yeah, that fits the dog. Flickered her ears as if she heard and accepted. I glanced at the pups, and you two, he chuckled softly. You're not going to stay nameless either. The bigger pup had thick, smoky fur and seemed to stumble over everything in his path. You're dusty, Henry said, with a grin. The smaller one had a soft reddish coat, almost glowing against the blanket. And you, he smiled. Your amber. The names felt right as Teddy unfolded. Henry found himself moving slower, more deliberately, watching Fepup nap, refilling water, tossing another log on the fire. The silence in the cabin no longer felt hollow. It felt peaceful that evening as the wind whispered through the pines. Hope inched closer and gently laid her head on Henry's boot. Quiet act of trust. He froze, stunned by the gesture. Then slowly he smiled. For the first time in a long while he didn't feel so alone. 2 days later, the snow had finally softened enough for Henry to make the drive into town. He wrapped Hope and the pups in an old blanket and gently loaded them into the back seat of his truck. The drive was quiet, long stretches of white fields rolling by, broken only by the crunch of ice beneath his tires. Hope sat tense, the entire riddy, her body curled around her pups. Her eyes watching Henry in the rear-view mirror. She didn't growl, but her unease was obvious. At the veterinary clinic, the warmth inside was a stark contrast to the cold. Henry had driven through. A woman in a green coat stepped forward. Drelane, mid-40s. Calm and clear-eyed, Henry explained the situation as Dr. Lane carefully examined Hope. She's severely underweight. Dr. Lane said softly, fingers tracing Hope's bony frame, but she's stout. The pups are lucky. She made Ithis far. Hope flinched when the vet ouched her too long, but didn't resist. It was clear she had known human hands before, and not all of them kind. After finishing the checkup and giving Hope some supplements and soft food, Dr. Lane asked gently, do you know where she came from? Henry shook his head. She just showed up during the storm. I couldn't turn her away. Dr. Lane offered a small smile. Well, she came to the right place on the way back home. Henry made one more stop, the local animal shelter. He printed out a photo he'd taken of Hope and Fepups by the fire and handed it to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Carol. She doesn't have a tag or chip, he explained, but I figured someone might have reported her missing. Carol studied it. Photo inside. No one's reported her, but dogs like her shepherds. Mothers, they're often dumped once they've served their purpose, especially out here. Backyard breeders souse them until they're spent, then tossed them aside. Henry's jaw tightened. I looked down at the picture. Hope curled around, dusty and ember, protective, fragile, and strong all at once. She wasn't tossed aside, he said firmly. She survived the ride back Washivier. That evening, as Henry stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee, Hope followed behind him. Dusty and Ember played by the door, chasing each other clumsily. Suddenly, Hope stopped, her ear shot up, her body stiffened. What is it, girl? Henry asked, following her gaze to the edge of the woods. There was nothing there. But Hope didn't move. Her nose pointed into the trees, her muscles tense, hackles rising. Henry stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Still nothing, but deep down something didn't feel right. And by Thieway, Hope refused to turn her back to Thewoods. Henry knew. She remembered something the following night, brought with it a deeper kind of stillness that made the air feel heavy, like something was waiting to happen. Henry sat near the window, the soft glow of fire behind him, a mug of coffee growing cold in his hands. Dusty and Ember were asleep on a folded blanket. Hope lay her, be alert but calm until she wasn't. Suddenly she stood up, ears perked, body rigid. A low guttural growl rumbled from her throat. Henry turned to the window, heart already racing. He moved quietly, pulling the curtain aside, and there at the edge of the woods a figure stood tall, still, just beyond the trine, watching Henry's stomach dropped. He set Mug down and reached for the rifle resting by the door. "Stay here." He told Hope, though he knew she wouldn't listen, opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. "This is private property." Henry called out, "You've got no business." A worthy man stepped forward just enough forth. Porch light to catch his face, weathered, mid-40s, eyes cold. He wore a tattered jacket and held a rope in one hand. "That's my dog." The man said evenly, "Been looking for her." Henry's grip tightened on the rifle. "Your dog showed up at my door half starved with 12 pups in the middle of a snowstorm. If she's yours, you sure as hell didn't treat her like it." She got out. The man replied, almost dismissive and plea. "No," Henry said firmly, "you dumb pet her or worse." The man stepped closer. "You don't know what you're getting into, old man. That dog's trouble always has been. She's not trouble," Henry said coldly. "She's a survivor and she's not going anywhere." Just then Hope appeared and feet away behind Henry, her body tense and protective. A deep growl rose from her chest, louder. This time primal, fierce. The man's face shifted, a flicker of recognition and fear. "She remembers Sayu," Henry said, "and she's not afraid no more." The man took a step back, therap slipping from his hand. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "You have no idea what she's capable of." "No," Henry said, stepping forward, rifle steady. "The only mistake was letting her get away from meshes. Not yours, she's family." Now there was a long silence, then the man turned and disappeared into the woods. Swallowed the night. Henry stood still, listening to the silence return, waiting for his shot to slow. He closed the door and locked it, then knelt beside Hope, who hadn't moved from her place. "He's gone," he whispered, placing a hand gently on her back. "You did good, girl. You protected us." Hope exhaled, her body relaxing for the first time. Dusty and Ember stirred from sleep and toddled toward her, bumping into her side, shackled around them instinctively. Her eyes still watching the door, and for the first time Henry realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing her ground, and he would too the morning after the confrontation. Henry didn't sleep in. He could not after what happened. He brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat by the window, rifle still leaning quietly in the corner, but fear felt lighter now. The fear that had haunted the cabin had lifted, not gone entirely, but eased. Hope lay curled by the fire, Dusty and Ember sleeping peacefully at her side. She no longer startled at every creak of the wood or whisper of wind. Her breathing was steady, calm. Henry took a sip from his mug and looked around the room. It didn't feel so empty anymore. Over the next few days something shifted. Hope began to meet his gaze with confidence. Dusty grew bold, exploring every corner of the cabin, while Ember followed cautiously behind her. Was laughter again, soft and quiet but real. One afternoon Henry chopped wood in the yard. When he looked up, Hope was watching him through the window, not with fear but with curiosity. A light tail wag tapped gently against the floor when he came inside. She greeted him at the door, just a small nudge of her nose against his hand, but it meant everything. "You're something else," he whispered, scratching behind her ears, tough as nails and still full of heart. That evening they all gathered around the fireplace. Dusty and Ember tumbled over each other, barking playfully. Hope rested nearby, eyes half closed, finally at peace. Henry sat cross-legged on the floor, closer than ever. When he reached out, Hope leaned into his hand with a hesitation. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You've got a home, and so do I." She let out a soft sigh and rested her head in his lap. In that moment Henry understood something he hadn't felt in years: purpose, not just survival, not just passing time, but the kind of quiet meaning that comes from being needed and choosing to stay. Hope hadn't just found a place to recover, she had found her family, and so had he. As the fire flickered low and the night deepened, Henry whispered the words he hadn't heard believe until now. "You're home, girl."